Welcome to Public Affairs. This is going to be a really, really good show because we're going to take you to clips of the Chicago mayoral runoff debate. We were at NBC Towers on March 8th, Mary Ann Ahern presiding, and she had, as I said, two candidates, Cook County Commissioner Brandon Johnson, former CPS Superintendent Paul Vallas. NBC5, Telemundo made a room available. Some press showed up. They fired questions at Paul Vallas, fired questions at Commissioner Brandon Johnson. You'll see that. You'll see the clips from the debate. And what we're going to do is talk a little bit about some of the things that were covered in the debate, some were not. We're going to take you to the full 13 minutes of the press conferences that followed the debate. Commissioner Johnson, Jeff Berkowitz, Illinois Channel. Paul, good to see you, Commissioner. Paul Vallas said 13 years ago on Public Affairs, and then again last year, you cannot be against school choice and for kids. Do you agree with him, or would you turn that around and say you can't be for school choice and for kids? Which is it, and can you explain?
Yeah, look, we have to be for public education. I mean, that's just the bottom line. You know, the fact that families have to apply for something that should be free, that's unconscionable. You know, look, as I've said multiple times, my wife and I are raising our 3 children on the west side of Chicago, and because our children play string instruments, we have to attend schools outside of our communities because our children deserve to have orchestra. But every single family deserves to have orchestra, music, art, a well-rounded curriculum. And so this is not about the stratified system that, of course, that Paul Vallas engineered, not just here in Chicago, but New Orleans, Philadelphia, Bridgeport, everywhere he has gone, he has failed the children and the families. I'm offering something that is very basic. Public education at the expense of the state, after all, is a Negro idea. That's W.E.B. Du Bois. Let's fulfill that promise of free public education.
Commissioner, do you think you focused enough on the issues tonight instead of attacking Paul's past comments that he has addressed and says are just noise?
Telling people the truth is a central part of how we transform politics in the city of Chicago. There's a lot at stake here. We cannot afford to go back to the politics of old that have left families behind. I'm always going to tell people the truth. Because what's at stake in this moment is that we can continue down this path of budgetary schemes that have forced families out of the city of Chicago, that has put our financial footprint in dire straits. I'm going to shift and change that. But we also have to make sure that we tell the people of Chicago how we got here so that we don't go back there. A better, stronger, safer Chicago is within reach.
Brandon, just kind of to follow up on that, noticed many times during questions you pivoted and went to those Republican comments, talking points that came out a whole bunch during the primary. Is this a signal that you're concerned with the polls showing you 11 points behind, that you have to go constantly on the attack like this?
We have put forth a substantial vision for the city of Chicago. Hiring young people, that's a big deal. It is answering the question. Hiring young people as opposed to forcing young people not to know their history, that's the difference between us. There is a difference. And people did not think that the interests of working families would make it this far. And yet here we are, telling people the truth by laying out our vision, but also making sure that the people of Chicago know that when we elected the first Black president of the United States of America, our dear brother, Barack Obama, it was at that point that Paul Vallas decided to switch parties and become a Republican. People get to know that. People get to know the truth.
What do you think of Paul's responses to your attacks about his comments on critical race theory and African American history? What he said he has tried to instill that when he was working for CPS. Do you not see evidence of that? Do you think that's not sufficient?
One of the top authors, Black authors, in the city of Chicago wrote an amazing book. And This book was highlighting and lifting up the fact that Blackness in the city of Chicago has value. Paul Vallas banned that book. As a public school teacher, we cannot afford to have someone who doesn't believe that the children of Chicago should know who Harold Washington is. Ida B. Wells, Fannie Lou Hamer. Look, we're going to usher in a better, stronger, safer Chicago. The reason why our campaign caught fire is because we are building a multicultural, multi-generational movement that is speaking to the needs of working people, that's speaking to the needs of middle-class families, that is speaking to the people who are living and suffering in poverty. And my plan and vision for the city of Chicago is going to pull people out of poverty, build the type of coalition that's going to be needed to actually govern this city. And there's a lot of excitement around that. I'm looking forward to leading the city of Chicago in just a few more months.
Commissioner Johnson, on the budget, people say the city of Chicago budget is $16 billion, CPS budget another $10 billion. Some add that together and say $26 billion. The question is, in your view, in terms of spending and taxes, is that too much for the taxpayers? Is that too little, or is it just right?
Look, there's room for economic growth. That's why I'm talking to business leaders all over the city of Chicago. This is Chicago, you all. We can't put restraints and limitations on the possibilities. We want to be a world-class city, a true world-class city. No one should be too poor living in one of the richest cities in one of the wealthiest countries at the richest time in the history of the world. We're going to eliminate the structural deficit. We're going to make critical investments up to $1 billion in my first term, and we're going to do it without raising property taxes.
We're out of time.
Thank you very much, you all.
Thank you. But not just Cook County Commissioner Brandon Johnson. Oh no, because that's only half of the equation. The other half is Paul Vallas. Superintendent Vallas, we use your old title. You told me, Jeff Berkowitz, LNI Channel Public Affairs, 13 years ago, that you cannot be against school choice and for kids. You told me that a year ago. Do you stand by that today? And could you explain your answer?
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of, and if you've watched all the panels I've participated in, there are different types of school choice. So, for example, opening magnet schools, which is what Gary Chico and I did. All the magnets except Whitney Young and except Lane Tech. Peyton, Northside College Prep, Gwendolyn Brooks, Lynn Bloom, King, the Brownsville Military Academy. Those are school choices. Putting IB programs that are open enrollment programs in 18 neighborhood high schools. 6,000 kids in IB. Those are school choice programs. Opening 7 military high schools in the Chicago Public Schools, public high schools. Those are school choice programs. So there is public school choice. There's public school choice. Charter schools are not-for-profit public schools. Let me point out that we actually only open 15 charter schools. But at the end of the day, we opened 30 new public high schools, and we put magnet programs in about 40 public high schools. Those are public school choices. So I believe that poor children should have an opportunity to enroll in schools outside their neighborhoods, other public schools with magnet programs, so that they're simply not their school options are simply not limited by their zip code or by their income. Next question.
Paul, you said repeatedly during the debate that your plans for public safety will get hundreds of police officers out of retirement, and that you're trying to entice hundreds out of retirement, that they're waiting to come back. What's the factual basis for that? Hundreds of people coming back out of retirement.
Me spending a year meeting with police brass up and down throughout the department. You know, almost a dozen of the commanders. Many individuals embedded in the leadership team. Me having conversations with the other representatives on the FOP. Me having conversations with rank and file officers. And this is what they've told me that is certain. Number one, there are hundreds of officers who will return, who want to return, but now, Greg, they're being told that if they return, they've got to go through training again, or they can't join the FOP. It's like an obstacle course. That's number one. And number two, there are veteran officers that I've had conversations with who retired, who will return from retirement. There are police superintendents all over this country who have brought hundreds of police officers back. So I'm absolutely convinced that I'm going to be able, and that we're going to be able to recruit hundreds of police officers back to the force once there's new leadership, real leadership, drawn from within, once there's a humane work schedule, once police feel that they're going to be supported, and once you return to kind of like that beat integrity so that the officers aren't being sent all over the city, I'm absolutely convinced that hundreds of officers will come back. I also might want to make one important point too, is we're losing 1,000 officers a year. I'm convinced, having gone in, having negotiated an 8-year contract with all the accountability provisions in the sergeant's contract, and having had that contract approved with almost an 80% plurality, an 80% approval rating, and I don't think police officers have ever agreed at 80% on everything. I believe that I have the support of the rank and file. The sergeants endorsed me too, I might add, because of the rank and file. And I'm convinced that I can encourage the 2,000 officers who are eligible for retirement now to wait, to give me a year to restore, to restore morale, to give me a year to do the things that will incentivize them to remain, while at the same time bringing hundreds of officers back. Because if I can restore the exit, the exiting of officers to a more normal year, I can quickly catch up by running 2 classes through the police academy like they did in the 90s, as opposed to 1 class. So I'm absolutely convinced that we can bring hundreds of officers back very quickly. And remember, and I think it was, I don't know if it was a Tribune or sometimes who did this story, only 53% of the officers that are actually on the police force are in the local districts. So filling the ranks with veteran officers, very important, and pushing the officers down to local police beats and to the CTA platforms. I'm convinced that we can, in the first 100 days, we can show some real results.
Paul, why did you largely not fight back when Vallas and Johnson was accusing you of, palling around of right-wing extremists, or that the election of Barack Obama made you want to switch parties?
You know why? Because Marianne was managing the debate, and for me to have jumped on him would have interrupted the process, and I didn't want to turn it into a free-for-all. Plus, this is what Johnson's going to do. He doesn't want to run on his record or lack of record. He talks about being a elementary school teacher. Did he ever mention that the school that he taught in was the Turner School that I built right in the heart of Cabrini Green, next to the Peyton School, which I also built when Cabrini was still standing, and we had basically guaranteed slots for the Peyton kids to go to, and for the Cabrini Green kids to go to Peyton. So he wants to make it about issues other than the issues. So I'm going to continue to focus on public safety, on quality schools, on transforming budgets into real community investment vehicles. I've been talking about these issues in your paper as an op-ed contributor by invitation in your paper, as well as others, for the better part of 3 to 4 years. It's gotten me this far. It's got me into the runoff, and I'm going to just stick to my plan to make it about the issues rather than a personalities. And I'll return fire when I needed to, but I really think I would have disrupted the process. How many times you can avoid answering the question so you can take a shot at me? Politics is a contact sport. I've been in tougher situations.
Last question.
Yes.
Paul, do you see that, just following up on Alice's question, with the polls showing you up by 11 percentage points, at least at this point, is this like early desperation on his part to just attack and pivot from answering questions, or what do you make of it?
I really think he always planned, to do it, because he doesn't have an answer. He couldn't answer the questions. Marianne asked him specific pointed questions that he refused to answer, and then she had to circle back and ask him again. I think it's. Do I think it's a tactic? Certainly, but I think it's a tactic because he hasn't been a candidate of substance. So at the end of the day, I'm going to continue to make this about offering real solid substantive solutions for all Chicagoans, for transforming the city of Chicago in the city that works for all its residents. And it's got me this far, and I'm going to cross the finish line by making this an issue-oriented campaign, at least from my perspective.
Thanks.
Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're going to take you to clips of the hour-long debate, the Chicago mayoral runoff debate.
Also in 2009, you said in an interview, you thought of yourself as more of a Republican. In fact, let's listen.
But someday you were thinking of running for Cook County Board President in the Republican side.
On the Republican side.
So are you now officially a Republican?
Well, I'll probably register as a Republican.
But you don't register in
the next primary.
You don't register.
Well, you have to enter the primary.
You have to take a primary ballot.
Right. You have to take.
You're saying you would take a Republican.
I would take
ballot.
a Republican primary.
You think of yourself as a Republican?
I'm more of a Republican than Democrat now.
Okay.
That was in 2009. What do you say to Chicago voters who question your party affiliation?
Yeah, well, let me point out that I'm a lifelong Democrat. I worked for Dawn Clark-Netsch and Phil Rock in the Senate. I actually ran for office as a Democrat in the Democratic primary against Rod Blagojevich and of course, Pat Quinn's running mate in 2014, which was 5 years after that interview. And of course, when I ran for mayor, I've always declared and I've always registered in the Democratic primary. So my history has always been that of a Democrat.
Mr. Johnson, you attended an event in 2020. It was called We Don't Call Police. And that same year, you said it was a political goal to defund the police. Here is what you said.
The President of the United States, the former President of the United States, President Barack Obama, took it one step further as well, and basically said that the effort of the defund police movement lost an audience because of that that slogan, I guess is what he's calling it, which I don't look at it as a slogan. It's an actual real political goal.
So, Mr. Johnson, what do you say to Chicagoans who do want more officers in their neighborhoods?
Well, my public safety plan does just that. It's why in my public safety plan, we're going to promote, train, and hire 200 more detectives so that we can actually solve crime in the city of Chicago. You know, it's going to cost me roughly $50 million to make sure that we are actually administering the consent decree. You know, right now, we're not administering the consent decree and we're not solving violence in the city of Chicago. By promoting and hiring 200 more detectives, we actually can solve crime.
Only half the high priority 911 calls are being responded to. 400,000 911 calls not being responded to because there were not police cars available. So we need to return to community-based policing where we have beat integrity. We also need to return to community-based policing where the CTA platforms and the CTA stations and the trains have the presence of police officers. The first thing you do is you make the type of leadership changes and changes in scheduling and changes of management and personnel that do not cause 1,000 police officers to leave every year. And then the second thing you do, and if you do that, there are hundreds of police officers who will in fact return. Those who have retired will come out of retirement. Those who have transferred to other police districts will return. So you can very quickly begin to supplement the ranks.
We have to make sure that we are strengthening the red flag laws so that individuals who are holding guns and receiving guns, that they don't have guns. Paul Vallas is supported by someone, Citadel, Ken Griffin, that is trying to manufacture and put more guns on the street. I'm working hard to keep guns off the street. The public safety plan that I have is going to promote, train 200 more detectives so we can actually solve crime and then alleviate the pressure from law enforcement for having to behave as social workers, counselors, and marriage therapists. That's how we support police officers and make sure we create a working environment where people actually want to serve.
Don't you think the public has a right to know who some of the names might be?
Well, I'm a collaborator, right? Most folks didn't think I would be here, yet here I am, right? And so, yes, we're having conversations, but as we continue to build our coalition and speak to people around the city, we'll get to that point. And it's not just for someone as a superintendent, you know, someone to run all of our agencies that reflect the values of the city of Chicago. If you are competent, collaborative, and compassionate, you're on the short list.
Mr. Vallas, have you spoken to anyone? Who's on your short list?
I've talked to a number of officers along with a number of commanders. It's not only replacing or finding a superintendent from within, and I will promote only a superintendent in an interim position because it's interim. You have to go through a process from within. But the first deputy, I'll replace a lot of the commanders who have been promoted, not based on their time and grade or their experience. So yes, I've talked to a number of commanders. I've talked to a number of police officers.
Would you give us their names? Doesn't the public have a right to know those names?
You know, they will when I become mayor. One of the reasons that the police are not clearing cases is because there simply aren't enough of them. There are 17 1,300 officers down. They have 1/6 the number of detectives that they have in New York, and you think just promoting 200 is going to solve that problem? Because there's not only that clearance rate, there's the clearance rates on murder, 1 in 6. There's the clearance rates on shootings, 5%. There's the clearance rates on other violent crime, less than 5%. So you've got to get serious about having the officers who can work the cases, and you've got to get serious about protecting witnesses and victims, which is a big obstacle.
And Mr. Johnson, how do you plan to hold these police officers accountable?
Well, this is about being smart, right? And my public safety plan lays out why it's important to actually hire and promote 200 more detectives, because our clearance rate is abysmal. Absolutely, we have to do that, and we can do that immediately. You know, I live in one of the more tougher neighborhoods in the city of Chicago. It takes 18 months to become a police officer. Under Paul Vallas's plan, the city of Chicago would have to wait 2 years before they see an officer on the front line. You know how you hold officers accountable? They need to know who their supervisor is, right? We have supervisors who supervise the supervisors. We need consistency. That's what rank and file members are saying. I've been a public school teacher. Imagine if your principal changed every 2 days. How do you hold people accountable if you don't even know who you're reporting to? And that's what my public safety plan gets at, to make sure that we're promoting 200 more detectives and there's some consistency in who they're actually being supervised by.
A quick rebuttal.
Yeah, let me respond. If you even have a fundamental knowledge of the police department, you know that if you reduce the number of officers exiting from 1,000 to the normal a level of 300, then you can begin to play catch up. Plus, as I stated, there are hundreds and hundreds of officers who will return if there's new leadership.
What do you think about retired officers coming back?
Well, if they're being asked to do someone else's job, what incentive do they have to come back and do the job that they were frustrated doing in the first place? That's why we have to be smart about policing. Having police officers respond to mental health crises and marital disputes, that is unfair. This is why I support officers to have their ability to actually do their job. And that's what I'm going to do as mayor of the Chicago.
Thank you.
We're going to pass Bring Chicago Home to raise revenue, to focus on housing. But I'm also committed to not raising property taxes, because that's what was done. $2.5 billion of property tax increase, again, because of the budgetary schemes of Paul Vallas. That's why we are in this structural deficit right now. We're going to eliminate that structural deficit, make critical investments up to $1 billion over 4 years, and we're going to do it without raising property taxes. Paul Vallas is going to raise property taxes. He promised to do that 5 years ago, $250 million, decided to not publish that because he knows it's not going to work.
Let me point out that when I was budget director, I actually passed budgets and put 13,500 police officers on the street without raising property taxes once. And when Gary Chico and I ran the Chicago Public Schools, and you covered us during those days, we actually balanced 6 consecutive budgets with average property taxes of 1.5%. In fact, a couple of years we didn't increase them at all.
Raising revenue where?
Yeah, the real estate transfer tax is one idea. And this is something that the people of Chicago want and deserve. But again, we're in this predicament because of the bad accounting measures of Mr. Vallas. The truth of the matter is he has not put forth a budget plan, because when he put forth the budget plan 4 years ago, he came in 9th place. So he decided to only put 3 sentences up on his website because he's going to raise property taxes.
Rebuttal, quickly.
Yeah, can I respond? First of all, let me point out again my record here, and not only freezing property taxes, but also significantly taxing below the pact at the Chicago Public Schools. But the bottom line is, when I took over the Chicago Public Schools, the pensions were 80% funded. When I left, they were over 100% funded.
Thank you.
And that's a fact.
That's what we're talking. You want to knock down the homicide rate? Well, I think you have. Vallas would say, I think you should ask him. Investigate. Arrest. When you arrest, if they're a career criminal, if they're a danger to society, keep them in. Detain. Go to the state's attorney and say, make sure you charge. Make sure you charge with a violent crime. Charge them if you can with a felony. If they're 17 years old and the law permits you to try them as an adult, do it. Get them now, not to be mean, but to get them on the right road so they don't commit more crimes. And Paul Vallas has said this. Check him out. Is he right? He says at any point in time, 80 to 90% of the people who've been violent offenders are out on the street. Is there any wonder crime is on the rise? These are the folks who commit the majority of crimes. We put them out on the streets to prey on you, the great majority of the 2.7 million citizens of Chicago, on the south side, on the west side, on the north side, on the east side. I'm just saying. Now you know why they say crime, crime, crime. Those are the issues. When Chicago public schools per student spending has grown 40%. 40% in how long? 20 years? No, in 4 years. Over the last 4 years, from 2019, when we were spending per student per year at CPS $20,000, almost $21,000, and now 4 years later, 2023, we're spending $29,206. So I don't know, folks. Brandon, you think we should spend more? Paul Vallas, what do you say? Should we spend more? Education is key because look at this data from Wirepoints. Despite spending $29,000 per student, only few CPS students can read or do math at grade level in 2022. 11% of Black students can read at grade level, 17% of Hispanics. 90% of the CPS population is either Black or Hispanic. So 90% of those kids, the great bulk of them, are not learning how to read at grade level. Whether it's first grade, second grade, 11th grade, doesn't matter. And if you can't read, you're a prime candidate in third grade, fourth grade to join a gang. If I were there, that's what I'd do. You say, oh, Jeff, that's terrible. You're telling me. Well, why should I sit around if they haven't taught me how to read and they've had me, say, for 4 years? Is it going to change? It's going to get better? I mean, what's the point here, folks? I might as well start building a career in crime. And if I only have one parent, that's fine. I understand struggling one parent. That parent may not have time for me, and I feel for that parent. And if I have two parents and they're working hard and they don't have time, there's a family. They call it a gang. They will have time for you. Look, I'm not telling anything you don't know. These are the problems. You know, CPS has got a problem. It's not easy. These kids are not coming to you with ideal environment, drug-free, violence-free, homes where, you know, there are parents who read books to them from the time they're 1 year, 2 years old, you know. But it is the job of CPS to compensate for that, not to whine about it, because teachers under the recent contract 2019-24 that Lori Lightfoot negotiated have boosted average salaries for those teachers to $100K a year. Well, they're working about 8 months because 4 months off for holidays and vacations. You adjust that, it's like 140 or 150K. The average, some are higher. Is 150K enough so I can expect you to do better as a teacher than 10%? 1 out of every 10 is all who's going to learn to read. And in math, it's going to be worse. It's going to be for Black students only 6%, 1 out of every 20. Is that what Brandon Johnson, when he says, I've asked him this, we need more money than $28,000 per kid per year. Really? Is he going to run on that? Crime goes up, salaries for CPS teachers goes up, for nurses goes up, for second-year teachers goes up, for teachers' assistants goes from $33,000 to $43,000. So up for crime, up for teacher salaries. And what do we say? Everything that goes down is the number of kids who can read at grade level. So performance goes down, cost goes up. Paul Vallas, you come on. Make it clear what you think. If you're going to change this, how are you going to change it? Have to be a little critical in the debate because this was the heart on the education issue. What are the data? What are you two guys going to do about it? Are you defending this? Are you defending the performance of these teachers, of the teachers' unions, of the administrators? Or are you saying, as Barack Obama did in 2008, hey, it's time for change? So you just remember, you come back, and we hope we get Johnson on, we hope we get Vallas on, maybe others before April 4th, so we help you decide. And just remember, you come back next week and every week to Public Affairs.